This episode of Pretty Much Pop is sponsored by Good Chop, a delivery service for high-quality meat. Learn more at goodchop.com/pretty120. This is Pretty Much Pop, a culture podcast, and whenever anything goes wrong with someone's recording or a miscommunication about scheduling or whatnot, I just assume at this point that it's aliens. Today we're discussing the long-running British TV show Doctor Who, premiered in 1963, canceled in 1989, revived in 2005 after a previous American revival attempt in 1996 failed, and late in 2023 released 4 specials designed to transition to the 14th season of the revived run, which would be its 40th season overall.
That is a mouthful. A mouthful.
I'm Mark Linsenmeyer with only one heart, but enough love for 2. And my favorite doctor is, I'm going to say because of the quality of the writing at the time, Matt Smith.
By the power vested in me, by the worshipful and ancient law of Gallifrey, I am Al Baker, coming to you from Leeds in the UK, and my favourite doctor is Peter Davidson.
Oh, man. Mark already stole my favorite doctor. I'll do my second favorite doctor.
Okay.
My name is Lawrence Ware. I'm coming from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. David Tennant is my second favorite doctor.
My name is Chris Rathjen. I'm coming to you today from Chicago, Illinois, where I have been on the run from my own people the whole time. And my favorite doctor is Peter Capaldi. Came in with a late move to the top of the list.
That's such an intriguing choice.
It is. It's an intriguing choice, but I do like him.
I mean, they're all good. This is consistently well cast. I always feel like Saturday Night Live, you can tell, at least the Lorne Michael cast, so almost all the casts, you could tell a Saturday Night Live person but they just look a certain way. They just look funny. And I feel the same with Doctor Who, that they're all just big presences. They have to look like somebody. They have to sound like somebody who is smarter than you, who is super self-confident. They've gotten more manic over the years. There's been some changes, and we can talk about the move to touchy-feely doctor in the recent one. I think this is sort of going to be top of mind of how this character has evolved over the years and what we think of the classic ones. It's really interesting that we mostly, besides Peter Davidson, picked, of course, Tom Baker's classic. Of course, John Pertwee. Is that his number 3?
Pertwee.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, so many of them are so good. If anything, I feel like Peter Capaldi is reviving the John Pertwee vibe. Chris, start us off with your history with this.
So I grew up in Iowa, and if people are aware, Iowa is actually the place where Doctor Who has been running continuously uninterrupted for the longest period of time because Iowa Public Television started playing Doctor Who in 1973, around the 10-year anniversary, and they never stopped through the entire wilderness years and everything and picked right up. So when you are a small, let's say, bookish child, and you're growing up on a farm quite far from any hustle bustle, the fact that you can watch Doctor Who on a Friday night is really the best thing in the world.
Interesting.
And so always had a great deal of love for it growing up, and then obviously was thrilled when the revival launched and have been thick with it the whole time.
So do you remember as a small farm boy your first exposure to the show and like what struck you about it?
I am pretty sure, it's early enough. I would watch it with my dad, so it's early enough where memories are still kind of fuzzy, but I'm pretty sure the first episode I recall watching was Carnival of Monsters, John Pertwee. Mm-hmm. Watching that with my dad, and obviously the Doctor, John Pertwee is a very dynamic. I think that it's been pointed out as the first time the Doctor was kind of played like a leading man, a hero instead of the scientist sidekick to a more virile companion. And running down the corridors, I have firm memories of that, but I also have the terrible monsters that they had there, the Drashigs, which I think were even not in story, but it was a joke that they were an anagram of dish rags because they knew that they were not going to have the budget for good monsters on that episode. And it's just in a way like a kind of a perfect classic Doctor Who story to throw at someone and say, this is what it is. And that's the earliest one I have. But they did not show on Iowa Public Television a lot of the Troughton or Hartnell serials. But pretty much everything that was in color was just on repeat, one serial a week for, I guess, now 50 years. So
very interesting.
I guess one interesting point to know about Doctor Who, and despite the fact that it's so treasured and has been running for so long, is that one of the reasons why you won't have seen that many William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton episodes growing up is that many of them were lost or destroyed until relatively recently. I mean, they're also very old and quite hard to watch, but it's like one of the fascinating things about Doctor Who that as you know, such a cultural phenomenon, but so much of it is just completely lost to history. Some of it because of devastating fires, but also some of it because like old tapes were routinely just deleted at the BBC because tape was expensive and repeats weren't really a thing.
This is probably a good place just to throw it. So I watched as a kid on PBS as well. Actually, wasn't a huge fan. Like, it was okay, but like I just left it for a long time until well after the reboot. Like, I was not an early adopter on the reboot. I was a few years in before I started just inhaling it and then rewatching it with my kids. And then I torrented the entire old series. And for all those missing episodes, people have taken production stills. Like, all the audio is still intact. People have taken production stills. So I have experienced all of the first two Doctors at least, and, you know, sampled a lot of the subsequent ones. But I've actually been a completist on those first two Doctor ones. And I'll tell you, the way that the mind takes in information, I don't remember which ones always had moving parts as opposed to still pictures. Like, I still know what the aliens look like. The visuals were pretty bad in the first place. It was a very auditory show when you started. It was, you know, very talky. So yeah, I feel like I've had as much experience as I need, such that when they did rediscover one, or they made animated versions of some of the lost ones, I haven't really felt the need to rewatch those particular, you know, the fourth of a story, that 120-minute chunk that has been recovered just for that purpose.
Interesting. Okay, so the way that I got into this, I got in with the revival. So I got in around David Tennant. I remember the episode that really wasn't Blink, the episode with David Tennant. Wasn't that David Tennant run? Mm-hmm. So that's the one that really got me.
Best goddamn episode, I think, in the whole series. I don't know.
I'm inclined to agree, but see, what got me into it was I'm a horror guy. Like, you know, if you listen to the podcast, if you know anything about me, I love horror. And so to see that Blink was like a genuinely scary horror story, but also very approachable for kids, that's what got me into it, right? It's because I was able to watch Blink with my kids, and we got into it. And so I watched from David Tennant forward, and then once I ran out of that, then I went backward to Christopher Eccleston, is that the guy? And watched those episodes. And then I was like, well, let me see some of the old ones. And then it really turned me off because those are really, really old, very, very different, right? And so I didn't like that for about, honestly, 5 years. I was not feeling it, didn't like it. And then I started doing this podcast, believe it or not, and Al very consistently would like praise the old Doctor Who episodes. And I was like, okay, I respect Al's opinion. Me and him banter a lot, but I respect his opinion. So I decided, okay, let me go back and see what I've been missing. And now I'm in. Now I've done all of them, right? But it took Al to really give me that push to get me to go back to the older episodes, because honestly, when I was first watching those, I did not like them. They were just not my flavor, way too talky. And maybe it's just me, but like when it comes to 80s shows, they need to be like Thundercats or something like that for me to get interested in it. I'm not really into the real lives, supernatural, sci-fi 80s shows. Like even Star Trek for a while, I couldn't get into it. But now I've kind of, I guess, elevated my taste. I've gone backwards. And I really appreciate those older ones, even though they're not my favorite. But I really appreciate them on a whole nother level now, I think. I guess the answer is thank you, Al.
Tell us more about your background. I think part of the reason that we did this is because of, you know, you as our resident Brit, you know, are just and having the personality that you have, you've been just seeped into this up to your eyeballs. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm a big nerd, and Doctor Who is one of the properties that means the most to me. It's up there along with Star Trek and like Avatar: The Last Airbender is like the top 3 things of all time. It's so challenging to describe how much something that means so much to you means to you. So my first exposure to Doctor Who, I think, would have come in 1997, and I'm pretty sure that the first Doctor Who I ever saw was the universally despised Paul McGann TV movie. But I was incredibly excited about it because I heard what Doctor Who was. I watched it with my dad, I think, and it was this huge event. So we watched it. It was like, I've watched it since and it's bad, but it was exciting enough to me at the time that then I was like, okay, I kind of like Doctor Who now. And it's just in the ether in the UK. It's in the cultural miasma. Everybody knows, like, even though police boxes were a real thing, if you see a blue police box, it's a TARDIS. Like, it's not the real thing anymore. Everybody knows what Daleks are. Everybody knows that you hide behind the sofa. Those have been like common jokes in the culture for decades, like before I was born. So I was like hugely aware of it. And I saw this TV movie, and then I think the next thing that I was exposed to was a novelization of, again, a John Pertwee story, Spearhead from Space, which I found in the school library. And then I started watching repeats of the old one. So by the time the relaunch happened in 2005, I was super on board. I was super excited. And the small group of friends that I had at university, which is where I was when it came out, were like, it was the cultural focus of our lives. Whenever it was on, it was genuinely like gather around the TV, watch it live, watch it a couple of times, usually back to back, and have like in-depth discussions about it afterwards. It was a really, really important show for me and my friends, and also just for people in general. I think it was the biggest show on British TV for like 2 or 3 years after it came back, which is just astonishing. But then I've been a huge Doctor Who fan for like most of my adult life. Mark and I have talked a little bit about our love of the audio stories, which I also think is worth mentioning. There's this huge, vast, extensive library of radio plays and dramatizations from a company called Big Finish Productions, which means that I think Paul McGann, even though he only appeared in the TV movie in one tiny episode, has more hours of being the Doctor on record than any other Doctor, just because he's done so many of these audio stories. Yeah, there's just this vast library, and it's lovely having this unknowable expanse of quality storytelling to be able to like continually dip into. I don't know about any of you, but I've long since given up the pretense that I'm ever going to engage with all of the Doctor Who media that there is. And a part of the appeal for me is having this huge expanse of material that is just there and ready for me to dip into anytime I want to.
Okay, wait. Okay, so Al, I got to ask you 2 questions. Well, first, are there still police boxes in England? Are they still around?
They are, but only as like ornaments. So there was one in Sheffield where I went to university, which is green, not blue. But they knock around. But that's not how we call policemen anymore.
Fuck that police box. That police box is full of shit. If it's not blue, I don't believe it. 2, The Last Airbender. Have you watched the live action remake yet? It just came out.
This is an after talk question.
No, it's not. No, it's not. God damn it, man! We got
50 years of Doctor Who to talk about. I don't want to talk about Last Airbender yet.
He's gonna shut me down. That's fine. Go ahead.
All right, Chris, what are you bursting to relate of your thoughts here?
All of these stories of how we came across them, I just think are very fascinating because there's no other show like it just in terms of its lifespan. It is a very good show, and it does have like some very like strong core concepts, but also it just looms large just by the virtue of the fact that it is the longest running sci-fi series in human culture. And when the show came back, one of the things that I thought was very interesting in the revival was there was a similar kind of thing where they had to deal with the fact, or chose to deal with the fact, that the Doctor in the original series was treated or presented as a traveler who kept getting into scrapes. And I don't think it's until Tom Baker era where he kind of admits that he's in the habit of saving planets. So that's the first time it's actually acknowledged that it's a thing that keeps happening to him. And then by the time the revival comes on, the character of the Doctor is acutely aware that he is a larger-than-life figure just by virtue of how much he has done. And the show, rather than play naive about that, has leaned into it. And the Doctor has had to ask, what does it mean that I loom so large in the universe? And I think one of the things I really like about the revival is how it kind of folded all of the meta stuff about what Doctor Who is into Doctor Who, because you've got whole season story arcs that are about how the Doctor has gotten too big and he's too well known, and the problems that causes for him. And it grows out of nothing more than just acknowledging how many stories there have been.
That is such a good thread to pull at, because one of the things I've been thinking about in the lead up to this is like how the show has declined in recent years, which is another common like observation. And one of the thoughts I always come back to about like why I find the later Stephen Moffat years and the Chris Chibnall years so actually less true with the Chris Chibnall years. They're bad for other reasons, but the later Stephen Moffat years, why I find them unpleasant in some cases, is that it seems to lean way too heavily on the Doctor's own like mythos as a driving point for the story, and I kind of miss the stories where I miss the times when the Doctor is building his legend rather than trading off his legend. Although it was always thrilling when like you had those moments where the Doctor like turns up at Gallifrey and has to have a grand accounting for all of his misdeeds or what have you. So having all the, so you're absolutely right. It was a real growth point for the show when it started acknowledging that, hey, the Doctor is actually a big deal and we should maybe treat him like a big deal. But I think it's also interesting that you picked up where I think like the principal point where the show's gone wrong in its more recent later years is leaning too heavily into that.
Well, I will say I do not think that acknowledgement should be an every episode thing. I agree that the huge I am the Doctor speeches, I actually love them, but there ought to be a limit of one per season on those. Every day can't be acknowledgement.
I am the oncoming storm.
Right. You can't live that way. And I do think I do agree that there has been some kind of needing to find a balance, but I appreciate that the ingredient is in there, and I think used sparingly, it can be quite powerful.
So you guys are kind of commenting on something that really turned me off in the last couple of years, the Jodie Whittaker Doctor. So let's talk about her for a second, because I did think that it was good for them to go in that direction of having a female Doctor, because there's absolutely no reason for them not to have a female Doctor. I'm also happy now we have a black Doctor, although I don't know if I like the actor they chose. We'll see how he does. But that was one of the things that turned me off, because when Jodie Whittaker was the Doctor, she kind of leaned heavily into what you guys are describing. And that, I think, is really the downfall. So am I judging her too harshly? Because I thought she was a decent Doctor. I thought it was the writing that failed her. So what do you guys think on when it comes to Jodie Whittaker? Because she is kind of universally regarded as the weaker of the Doctors that they've had so far. So why do you think is it her acting? Was it the writing? Was it them leaning too heavily into what you're talking about? Like, what's going on there?
I had just stopped watching a few years ago. You know, I watched the beginning of the Jodie Whittaker one, and then I trailed off. But I had been pretty religious about it up through. Yes, it got a little stale. Near the very end of the Matt Smith and into some of the Capaldi stuff. So my theory is that it's just viewer fatigue, that it has actually not gone down seriously in quality. It's sort of, I bet people that discovered it at the, you know, in the Peter Capaldi period or whatever, that like probably did not have the same sense that we are. And I think it was even acknowledged on the show in these specials of like, oh, you've been wearing yourself out too much, Doctor. You have to just go live a normal life and rest for a while. I feel like there's something about just the dynamic and the ever increasing stakes, that the things that made the best of the David Tennant and the Matt Smith years great is because they were switching to these more and more ambitious season long arcs and stuff. And there's just only so much you can accelerate. There's only so many times you can raise the stakes. And so after a while, it just seems like, okay, I guess, you know, it's more of the same. I don't know. I don't know if I need this on a weekly basis in my life. I don't know.
I think the stakes issue is certainly a big part of it, like especially after Stephen Moffat, who that's just his deal, right? It was the same thing in Sherlock. You got small stakes. You've got to raise the stakes every single season, and it gets a bit ridiculous and unwieldy. And then you've got to feel for Chris Chibnall, who has to come in and try and start small again after all of the Stephen Moffat work, but also, it's just clear that Chris Chibnall represented a drop in quality in the show overall. You can just watch the episodes from side to side.
Agree.
I don't think anybody thinks it's a Jodie Whittaker problem. She's terrific. Everybody I tried to watch some Jodie Whittaker Doctor for this, just to try and be fair to her again. but everybody in those episodes looks just dead behind the eyes. Nobody looks like they're having a good time. and that just speaks to bad production vibes.
Yeah, I would agree. And, these are not unique insights on my part, but the writing for even the companions, they are written interchangeably. You could have written, here's the exposition that needs to happen in a scene, and you could have just pulled the individual lines out of the hat and delivered them that way. It sounds insane to say, knowing that he has had a storied career and knowing that he has had big successes, but when I look at the episodes of Doctor Who that Chris Chibnall has written, the dialogue does not seem to be professional television caliber. It
feels very stilted. It's very stilted. You're right.
I personally love Stephen Moffat. I know some people have varying issues with his tics, but he can write dialogue where every line is either funny. Every line has an emotional weight. Every line has a plot value, and every line is performing characterization. And you can get spoiled on that if you get it in your head that that's how all television should be. I don't even want to compare the change to like a children's show, because I've seen children's shows that are written with better kind of characterization.
Whoa, that's a burn, man.
Yeah, sorry. I have a low opinion of that.
That was a burn.
Yeah.
I think it's honestly less about writing and more about show running. And I think it's important in this moment to bring up the spectre of Russell T Davies, because I think another reason that the show hasn't been successful since Chris Chibnall took over is one thing I think has gone on is people have kind of underestimated the degree to which New Doctor Who is fully Russell T Davies's baby and brainchild, and like the tone of the show, what makes a new Doctor Who story, what makes a new Doctor, all of that stemmed from his work in bringing the show back. And because Stephen Moffat worked incredibly closely with Russell T Davies, I think there was probably a smoother transition. They share a lot of the same kind of sensibilities. But I didn't really think about this until I started thinking about why they were bringing Russell T Davies back. And I was thinking about why they decided they needed to bring him back. And I thought perhaps it's just because he's the only person who knows how to make the show that he started making again.
So watching the first special of these four that he was then responsible for again, I did not necessarily feel that it was a step up. It felt like a little bit of a kiddie show, kind of a predictable plot. It's just to outline for people. There's a fuzzy, cute alien who then it is revealed, I don't think this spoils anything, is actually not fuzzy and cute. So there you go. I mean, it's called the Star Beast. I thought it was fine, but I didn't feel like, I thought there was actually quite a bit more depth in the previous season. And I know what you're saying about, and I don't want to, keep arguing the point about the quality of the scripts or whatever, but like, I felt like the ongoing tussling about is the Doctor capable of romantic love is interesting to me. And it became a thing with Yaz, the companion in the last run. And I think they've even done something that, Davies spinned that out into a new interesting thing of like, well, is he he's definitely not gendered. The fact that he could switch back and forth. And now I think in seeing finally the new one with, what is his name?
Ncuti Gatwa.
Ncuti Gatwa. Yeah. I had seen him on Sex Education. And
he's really good on that.
There was one scene near the end of Sex Education where he sort of is saved this person who is a trans person who is maybe suicidal, where he gets very fatherly and confident. And I'm like, okay, that is what I think this is the Doctor. But then he's acting sort of too much like that character. Like as the Doctor, I understand maybe this is like, let's appeal to a young and hip audience and get a hip companion and have this chemistry and they're singing and what, I don't know. So what you thought about this as an arc in terms of now he's newly emotional, post-gendered, this kind of launching point?
So yeah, despite my bigging up of Russell T Davies just now, these last few episodes were clearly not his best work. I think you bring up a really interesting point because obviously having a new black gay Doctor is fantastic and
bearded
and he's incredible.
We've never had a beard. Yeah, you're right, Mark. That's an important part. We've never had a beard. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's true.
Technicality.
Yeah.
And the Valiard had a beard, I think. It's really interesting because I'm one of those people who thinks that the Doctor has had too much romance in the recent years, especially because like the original Doctor, it's really interesting because you always come back to like, how is this too different? How can it be the same character? What are the essential features, right, of the character of the Doctor when the Doctor can change so dramatically from one thing to another? But one of the things I was always attached to was the idea that he was kind of sexless and grandfatherly and like broadly aromantic, which all changed with David Tennant. But we got some really, really cool and interesting stories about it, so it's hard to be angry at it. But I do kind of wish that there could be room again for a more sexless version of the Doctor. And I guess one problem is that if you have a gay Doctor, the gay Doctor has to be gay. Otherwise, what's the point of having the gay Doctor?
We'll see. I kind of think that he might be post-physical in this new, like, we're going to have an attitude that is
post-physical,
sort of gay.
Did you just create something post-physical?
I don't think he's going to have any relationships as this new thing. That is my prediction.
No. We gotta back up. What the hell is post-physical? Like, I need you to explain to me what post-physical is.
He's an alien. You don't want to fuck an alien. An alien doesn't want to fuck you.
Well, then why are you having romantic? I'm very confused about post-physical.
He can love everybody, and they can love him or them. I don't even know if there's a new pronoun for that. Anyway.
Post-physical, like he doesn't hug. Like I don't understand what you're talking about. Post-physical. Go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I kind of agree with Al. I understand why they introduced that aspect when the show came back, both in and out of story. Out of story, you want this character to sort of check the box of a romantic lead, even if they're not, ending up hooked up. Mm-hmm. In story, I kind of felt it was, obviously he had his feelings for Rose Tyler ended up being romantic. Mm-hmm. And I that didn't bother me because in story, it was like such a specific time in his life. Like she brought him back emotionally from the dead. And so the fact that he would feel that connection to her did not offend me in the slightest. I think the whole romance with River Song was handled very well. I think that's the closest thing you can see the closest thing I can imagine to the Doctor having like a romance of equals is him and River Song. I was not a big fan of kind of the romantic undercurrents or hints that happened in the first few Matt Smith seasons where he sort of flirted with Amy a little and it was sort of toyed that there might be a love triangle kind of situation. I think they milked that way too much just to get to the point where I knew where they were going to end, which was Amy and Rory are together and the Doctor is just their friend. And I'm like, I knew that's where we were going. Why couldn't we have gotten there a season earlier? One thing I do appreciate is I think the show has kind of worked and thought on its feet and has been in constant conversation with itself. So I think when Matt Smith kind of flirted with Amy Pond, that was commenting on the fact that David Tennant had been a romantic lead, and the Doctor, in his mind, has thought of himself that way. And then there is a scene when he turns into Peter Capaldi where he tells Clara, but it's clear he's also mostly telling himself that he is not that guy, that he is a 1,000-year-old alien. And it's wrong to think of him that way, and it's wrong for him to have let himself think of himself that way. And I kind of love that level of introspection because it feels like the level of introspection you would have if you had 2,000 years to think about your life.
I mean, I do also wonder, though, in a meta way, if Peter Capaldi was just way too old to pull that off, and whereas Matt and David Tennant were much younger, and it kind of made sense for them, but it would feel really, really weird for Peter Capaldi to have that romantic relationship that they had. Well, those romantic undercurrents that they had, it would have felt really weird and old and strange. But again, I do know there's a history of British men, getting younger women. So I don't know.
Is that a British phenomenon?
I think it is. I think it is a distinctly British. Doesn't happen in America at all. Doesn't happen here at all.
Hey, it's Sarah Lynn from Pretty Much Pop here to tell you about our sponsor, Good Chop. Everyone wants to start their year off on the right foot. And for me, that means making sure I'm eating well and have enough energy to do everything I want to do. But I'm not going to run to the butcher every day to get a fresh cut of quality meat. That's just not going to happen this time of year. That's why Good Chop is such a lifesaver for me. Good Chop offers fully customizable boxes of high-quality meat and seafood delivered to your door on your schedule. The products are vacuum sealed and frozen at peak freshness, so you can stock your freezer and cook when you want. In fact, last week I baked portions of salmon for my husband and me. I threw in some quinoa and tossed a salad, and bam, a healthy, delicious dinner was ready in 30 minutes. You can't beat that. Good Chop especially prides itself on sourcing meat that comes with no antibiotics or added hormones ever. No artificial ingredients, only the good stuff. They're so confident in the quality of their cuts, they offer a 100% money-back guarantee. Love Good Chop or get your money back. So go to goodchop.com/pretty120 and use code pretty120 to get $120 off across your first 4 boxes. That's code at pretty120 at goodchop.com/pretty120 for $120 off. goodchop.com/pretty120, code pretty120.
One of the things that bothers me about this is that it's usually the companion's character depth that suffers, right? So we had Rose and the Doctor, and that was this incredible, organic, very well-grounded relationship. But then we had Martha, who had to be defined by the fact that she loved the Doctor unrequitedly, and then we had to have Amy and Rory, where the Doctor was getting in the way of their marriage. And it wasn't until Catherine. And the thing that I liked most about Catherine Tate was the fact that it was a big sisterly relationship that she had with the Doctor, and there was no hint at anything remotely sexual going on at all, which I thought was a really good return to what I think some of the better companion Doctor relationships are. On which note, should we talk about companions a bit more generally? Who's everyone's least favorite?
We probably least favorite? Oh my gosh, I wasn't prepared for that.
I think it says a lot about you whether who your most hated Doctor Who companion is.
I mean, some of the ones that are just bad actors, and I don't even want to say their names because they could be listening to this. Maybe they listen to all Doctor Who related media, but I would not rule out the people that reappeared after long last in the recent episodes to reflect their. I just got to get to Heathrow Airport. And this through episode after episode. I mean, that was aggravating.
Oh, man. Okay. I hate to say this. Oh, man, because he's a black man. But Ryan Sinclair really did not work for me. Not at all. Al, what do you think about that guy?
Was that...
Al did not watch enough Whittaker to get.
Oh, the Jodie Whittaker thing. No, I didn't. I haven't watched all
that
the Jodie
guy.
Whittaker, but I know the guy you mean.
He
but
just
again,
did not work for me. He didn't work for me. Chris, what do you think about that guy?
I kind of agree. It's hard for me to, like I said, it's kind of I'm writing that off to my theory about how these characters are not written really in any meaningful way. But yeah, you can't really latch on to someone. You can't figure out what makes them tick. The actor had moments of charm and charisma, but Ryan's not a real character.
He's not a real person. The actors are typically if you watch the actors in other things, they're good actors. They're really, really good. It's just that for some reason the writing just failed those guys. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah, the Whittaker companions do not seem terribly strong to me. If you go back to the classic series, again, you can write this off to writing, but during it's the era that killed the show, was the Colin Baker, Perry Brown, I can't remember the actress's name. Okay, I do remember the actress's name, but I'm just gonna blame the character here. But where the dynamic was cranked to 11, where it was all bickering, but not charming banter. It was just vicious, spiteful yelling at each other. And that, I think, is not a good companion dynamic. I feel like that is almost a parody of the Doctor-companion dynamic. Those are the ones that really kind of stand out to me when the companion isn't fulfilling their role in the story, because structurally, I think the companion Doctor is a great structure. I think it works great in stories. I think it's great for plot because they can get split up and they can each be learning things, but also because your recurring cast is 2 people, that needs to be kind of the emotional heart of the show. You need a laugh on the TARDIS at the end of every adventure between your Doctor and your companion. to kind of ground and remind you why you like these people. Why does the Doctor go out? He's got the power of a god, and he chooses to use it to help normal people. Well, who are normal people? Well, here's a normal people, and look how amazing a normal person is.
I really agree with Chris, and the function of the companions, much like you said earlier about the way the Doctor takes his own legend more seriously over time, or the show takes the Doctor's own legend more seriously over time. The show also takes the role of the companions more seriously over time, and it's only in the late Tom Baker years and early Peter Davison years when you start having the Doctor reflect on why do I seek out these people just to put them in dangerous situations, and and the deaths of his various companions start to weigh kind of heavily on his conscience, which is something else the show's used really, really well as a kind of character development and story stick. My least favorite companion is Ace from the Sylvester McCoy years, but again, that's definitely because of the general production quality of the show at the time. Perry is in some outstanding audio adventures with Colin Baker.
Yeah, I think the Big Finish thing reformed some of those things. Like I tried watching really any Sylvester McCoy Seventh Doctor is almost unwatchable. It's so 80s in a terrible way. It is not. The budget is so much smaller than like Star Trek Next Generation. Mm-hmm. It's just not even comparable. Yeah, I think all the Mel and Ace during that period are terrible, but I had no problem with both of those actresses in the audio plays. And the fact that they added in new ones, which I was hoping, and in fact, I didn't really know during, they show Mel during, or one of the people during one of the specials, and I thought they had taken one of the audio only people and brought her out into the real world. And I was like, oh, this is making this actually official. And I had heard something. Have you guys read anything of like there's going to be maybe a Paul McGann spin-off show to actually have more televised things with him?
I've heard I've heard conjecture. They know that Russell T Davies is willing to do spin-offs, and everyone is kind of stuck scrambling, trying to imagine what they might be. So I know that one's been floated. That'd be great.
It'd be amazing. He's had so much practice. So Paul McGann's one of my favorite. Like, he ranks super highly up there just because of the quality of the audio work he's done. And there are so many amazing stories that he's had so much practice being the Doctor already. It'd be fantastic.
Did you guys see it? I mean, we haven't really talked about any of the spin-offs. So Torchwood, that was the thing that Chibnall had done before, which was okay. And I didn't love it. I thought its final season, that was like a season-long arc that was really dark. I like that quite a bit.
Was that the miniseries? Was that Children of Earth?
Yes,
that you're talking about. Yeah, that's some of the best like Doctor Who storytelling that there is.
That's Davies, right? That's
I thought that was Chibnall. Okay, I thought Chibnall like created the whole show, or was the main writer.
He was probably the number 2 writer for Torchwood. It was still a Russell T Davies joint. So and Children of Earth, which I agree is just one of the best stories ever set in the Whoniverse, is a Russell T Davies story.
And then the Sarah Jane Adventures that I only watched a little of with my daughter because she was age appropriate for that at the time. I really like that actress. She had a really strong personality, but it was it was weirdly duplicative. It was like the Nickelodeon version of Doctor Who.
I think that's exactly what it was trying to be.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, but they were able to kind of pull it off because of the quality of the actor. I'm not the first person. Doctor Who has gotten very lucky over the years. There are long stretches where the fact that they got like charming people with screen presence to deliver sometimes quite weak lines has kept the show going even in lean times.
It's definitely carried them. You're right about that.
Because we're talking about spin-offs, and again, to return to the audio things, the number of ways that they have found to spin off of Doctor Who lore for multiple seasons, like dozens and dozens of episodes and dozens of different stories for each of these things, is incredible. There is a 7-season-long political thriller based on like the politics of Gallifrey during the high politics of Gallifrey during various periods of its existence. There are dozens and dozens of like Victorian paranormal investigator stories with Yago and Lightfoot. There are dozens of stories about like specific companions, and like Iris Wild Time. There's a phenomenal series starring Derek Jacobi as the Master. They've got loads of different Master-focused stories, but Derek Jacobi's War Master series, highest recommendation for anyone who wants to jump into the audio stuff. He's so deliciously evil and is clearly having an amazing time.
I've never even heard of this stuff before.
How can there be so much? Because the only like comparable thing I can think of is Star Wars in terms of the expanded universe, maybe Warhammer. But like, isn't it weird how there's just so much of this stuff? It's such a niche show. How is there so much of it?
You're not crazy. It is weird. It's weird. We have so much. I think about this when I think of the classic series is, you know, we had discussed maybe like dipping into like the lore of the show. But I think one of the reasons the original series worked so well is they really held themselves back from explaining the lore too much. They really dribbled it out. And it's one of those things where, if done properly, you're letting your audience do all the work. If you evoke a feeling of something grand, you don't need to write it. Your audience will write it in their heads. And Doctor Who has done that so well, and with like the Time Lords and the current Time Lords and the Time Lords at the dawn of time under Rassilon and like all of this stuff. There are epics around every corner and every like dropped hinted line. So if you are excited about that, like, you know, and the people who write these stuffs, they're fans. They grew up and they were excited to like fill in all of these corners and say, well, here's what's behind this and here's what that's about and here's what that dropped line is. And I think that is possible because for so much of the show's history, it's actually been quite restrained in how much it explains. It does a lot more hinting than it does explaining.
That's very true.
I guess that explains. I mean, the during the Chibnall years here, we got a whole new thing. Just somebody had dropped Time Lords only have 13 lives, sort of just to be random about it. and as we got to the point where the Doctor is going to run out, they had to invent a way. Oh, actually, the Doctor is not a typical Time Lord at all and is not limited in this way. And we open up a whole new potential can that they specifically didn't just like explain to the audience or explain to the Doctor, that we know that there are these other lives, you know, -1 and -2 or whatever, but we're not going to tell you about them yet because we want to have the potential to dribble that out over the next over many years.
Now, I don't know what kind of show this is, so I'm going to do a point of lore order. If this is too down a rabbit hole, just cut the whole thing.
No, I want to go there.
I do want to note that the 13 regeneration limit was addressed before the Timeless Child reveal. It was addressed in Matt Smith's final episode, The Time of the Doctor, where the end of the story is the Doctor being given a new regeneration cycle by the Time Lords.
That's right. I remember that. I remember that now. You're right.
I knew that I would come into this having forgotten more than most people have learned about Doctor Who. And I literally have forgotten so much of what because it's been quite a few years since I got really deep into this.
I vaguely remember somewhere in the deep lore that the limit was only artificially placed there by Rassilon so that he would always have one up over the rest of the Time Lord. I don't know if that's exactly true, but it's the kind of shit that Rassilon got up to.
Well, and I think to go back to what I was saying a second ago, like that I think is something that writers spun off from the fact that in the 20th anniversary special, the Master had hopped bodies because he had burnt through his lives and needed to used someone else as a life raft. And one of the things the Time Lords bribed him with to get his assistance was a new regeneration cycle. And from that throwaway line to like, why could they get him to help them? It implies that it is a process. It implies that it can be grafted onto other beings. And it's a setup from kind of a throwaway line to explain what motivates the Master. Well, what motivates the Master is his continued survival, always. And the Time Lords can offer him probably the biggest chip in that pile in the whole universe, regeneration.
But that numbered limit is a really good example of the ways in which the show was just comfortable throwing out little bits and pieces of lore, even though it didn't have a big lore document to back it up from or whatever else it might be. But things like, because I'm thinking now the 11, who is another really cool villain that the Doctor had, who was a Time Lord who had a kind of dissociative personality disorder in that all of his regenerations were currently living within his brain. It's just really cool to have a kind of organically self-replicating story like that. So there's always something to build more out of. And I guess maybe that's why it's disappointing when you start to see focus in the later series of people just standing on top of the mountain of lore that they already have and saying, look how cool and important this is. Because there's always a little nook or cranny that maybe you could explore a bit further.
We haven't really talked about the villains so much. I mean, the Master, obviously, amazing character, can be just as dynamic as the Doctor, all these different personalities and regenerations, but deliciously just fucking nuts. At least the played manically by the last bunch of people that have done it in a great way, parallel to the Doctor. And of course, Daleks and Cybermen and the continuity with the old series means that the terrible costumes they had have to be, they don't just reinvent it. They don't just make a completely different design. They feel they have to have some continuity, unless I'm just, like the Sea Devils, right? Wasn't that a Troughton episode? I didn't go back and look, but I'm sure they looked terrible before.
Berkeley, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and they looked pretty bad. These giant foam heads kind of talking out of the sides of their mouths.
It didn't work.
And that's kind of typical of Doctor Who aliens, that they have to look cheesy because they have this connection, and they won't just no, we're just doing it CGI and it's going to look totally better.
I mean, they don't always look cheesy. Like sometimes
I'm really surprised
they
didn't make the Zygons look better when they brought them back.
True.
Or the Sontarans. It's just a stupid design in the first place. These cannonball-headed creatures, whatever.
I don't know. I might be the target audience for that. I've got enough nostalgia that I would feel bad if a new alien that looked like the Sontarans showed up. But if a Sontaran shows up, I'm like, yeah, well, that's what a Sontaran looks like. What are you going to do?
Even though they looked really cheesy, my favorite is by far the silence, though. I love the silence. And their look and their presence is very effective for me. It is slightly cheesy. It's right there on the verge of it. But I think it's really, really effective, at least for me. That really worked for me.
Well, that's a new one, right? Those guys were...
Yeah, they're newish. They're newish,
yeah. So they didn't have to say, let's make it look like something from 1970. They actually had a canvas that they could work with. I mean, it was interesting where, the Toy Master, we have to recast that. I mean, and that's the movement, is that we recast the first Doctor. He was already recast, in the past because he died shortly after being the first Doctor. And I wonder how far, I guess with CGI, this will be the thing later of oh yeah, we could have the estate of Christopher Eccleston says it's okay for the estate with the estate of John Pertwee to have those guys hanging out with the new Doctor in, I guess it's all a matter of legal and moral issues of how you can have these. They should be able to keep interacting in some form or another throughout the millennia, but it's probably better with the Toymaker, because who gives a shit if they recast the Toymaker? It's much cooler to have Neil Patrick Harris, a modern actor who loves the show and wanted to do something, than to have CGI version of the original actor who very few people remember.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
So I did end up rewatching City of Death at everyone's suggestion. In the past, it's been what I've shown people when I was trying to get them to like a classic Doctor Who story. So I think it's a great one because it looks so good, and it's got I don't remember whether he's credited or not. I know there was some vagueness of that, but Douglas Adams wrote the script for it, and it's the Doctor being at his funniest. And I think it's interesting to look at, we were talking earlier, what stays the same about the Doctor and what they decided to bring in to the new era. And I think if you looked at City of Death, you would have no trouble seeing how this is the same show than what it was back then.
It's definitely true to say that the Douglas Adams effect on that era of Doctor Who really clearly shaped the direction that Russell T Davies took it after the relaunch. there's that real absurdism in some of the like aliens and so on. Douglas Adams also did, I think, The Pirate Planet was one of the Tom Baker episodes that he did, which is just gloriously absurd in a similar kind of ways. And that reminds me of a lot of the places that the Russell T Davies ended up taking the Doctor, like Gridlock. That seems like Gridlock seems like something that Douglas Adams could have written similarly.
I feel like we haven't quite said why there could be so many stories, even more so than in Star Trek or something, is because just the fact that this was originally conceived as a history show. And so many of the early episodes are just like, let's have the Doctor and his friends go back to ancient Rome. And what were things like for ancient Romans? And they can still do that if they want. Although it's almost always still, we go back to ancient Rome and there's aliens. And we have to defeat the aliens that are trying to screw up ancient Rome, So, but it seems, at least in theory, that it's completely open-ended, that you can go and have this Agatha Christie thing about, her lost period, and we'll explain that with aliens. And ad nauseum.
As much as the TARDIS is a time machine, it's also just a genre machine. You get in the TARDIS and you come out and suddenly your story is a different genre for a week. You get to see, like, what does the Doctor do in this genre? How does he fit into an Agatha Christie story? Like, how does he fit into a horror story? And I think that's probably why the show has had such legs, because you can tell any story with it. The Doctor just has to be there.
Mm-hmm. Or Torchwood it, and no, he doesn't.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It also points to one of the things that's also remarkable about the show, which is a show which has turned into something which is so thoughtful and so beloved and so impactful to so many people, was so cynically designed. Like from the word go, the fact that this was just something that was there because the BBC needed to fill 25 minutes between, I think it was Grandstand and Top of the Pops. So they needed something that the dads who were watching football and the kids who were watching, let's say, the Monkees perform on Top of the Pops in the 60s or whoever it was. They needed something that would draw both of those audiences together and which could be done very cheaply or relatively. It was actually relatively expensive, but like not with American money, certainly. So they've got this box and they can put it in various kinds of gravel pit, and that can represent like lots of places and a history show. So you can use all the costumes and the sets that the BBC has lying around from the other stuff that they're doing. And they didn't give a thought to the fact that this is something that's going to mean it's going to run for like 50 years. We'd be able to tell infinitely many stories from it. And I don't know whether to give those people, or how much credit to give those people, because they were clearly making such like cynical, business-minded, like corporatist, like focus grouped decisions. And this is the way, this is not supposed to be the way that great TV shows are made. Great science fiction shows are supposed to be made like by people like Gene Roddenberry, who have a vision for humanity and want to express it through the medium of television. Right. This is a great sci-fi show that was made because there was a schedule gap that needed to be filled.
In a way, I do, when you talk about it that way, it does really make me think that Russell T Davies is carrying on a proud tradition, because I know he personally loves Doctor Who on a very personal level, but his idea of how to express that love for this property is to make it a massive commercial success. He believes that it should be the biggest thing on Earth, and that is how he expresses his love of Doctor Who, is to very methodically look at the media landscape and figure out what he can do to make it the biggest thing.
Okay, and so we've done all this talking about Doctor Who. However, for many people, they may not know anything about this show, right? So if you're going to, and I don't know if this is a good wrap-up question, I don't know if we're going to end it on this, but if you're going to suggest to a person, like, what is a classic Doctor Who episode that's a good way in, and what's a modern Doctor Who episode that's a good way in, since you guys are, you're the leaders, you guys are the brain trust, you guys are the Doctor Whoians. Dr. Whovians? What do they call them? Anyway, since you guys...
Whovians is a term, but that sucks.
Since you guys are the ones, like, I'm going to let you guys tell us, what is the best entry point? If you can give me a classic one, that's great, but at least a modern one. So for me, if I'm going to say to someone, hey, you got to watch Doctor Who, I'm going to say Blink, because that's just my favorite episode. It has a wonderful, like, ethos. It's really scary-ish, right? But not too scary. That's the one I'm going to say. But what about you guys? What is the one episode that you would say, okay, watch this one, and if you want to get into this show, this is a good entry point?
I would say don't Don't watch a classic episode if it's your first time watching Doctor Who, because they're fantastic, but they're hard to watch unless you have a particular sensibility and you know what's going on already.
Okay.
Just stick with the modern ones.
Got it.
Lots of people recommend Blink. I actually think that Blink is the episode that you should watch, maybe third or fourth.
Really?
Because it's fantastic and it's possibly the best modern Doctor Who story, but the Doctor isn't in it a huge amount.
He's not, you're right.
And it doesn't give you a great introduction to like the core of the story. The one that I would suggest that people watch first is Midnight, which is probably my personal favorite modern Doctor Who story. No, it might not be as good as
which one is that?
As Blink. Midnight is a 10th Doctor and Catherine Tate story where the Doctor is trapped in a shuttle. It's a bottle episode where the Doctor is trapped in a shuttle for almost the full length of the episode, and the monster is an invisible creature who is copying and stealing the voices of the passengers in the shuttle. And the villain of the piece
episode. I remember that episode now. Yeah,
it's very, very Twilight Zone. Is wonderful. But the monster in the story is invisible and stealing people's voices. But the villain of the piece is like panicked people and how they react in a crisis. And I think it really, really perfectly sets up like the moral quality of the Doctor and why that's important to the character and who he is and the stories that he tells. But it's also just utterly fantastic. But I would then put Blink somewhere down there too, but more or less any of the early Russell T Davies, David Tennant episodes are probably where people should start.
Chris, what you got?
I do kind of agree with Al that a classic sell is probably a bit much for a new person. Wait till they really love Doctor Who. And then, yes, then I would actually say City of Death's a great one. I don't think it's the only one that could fill that slot, but I'm not sure. It's second to none, I'll say, for that role. For a modern story, I think the Christopher Eccleston two-parter, The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances, is, in my opinion, it is a perfect Doctor Who story. If someone came to me and said, there's an asteroid coming and we can save one episode of Doctor Who in a time capsule, that would be the one I tossed in there because I feel it is just a platonic ideal of a Doctor Who story. It takes place in Blitz, Britain, World War II Britain. All of the characters, aside from the Doctor and Rose, are like hiding from Nazi bombs. The monster is this child that's had a gas mask fused to its face, and it is basically a zombie story where this condition keeps being passed on. But you look at, like, I've gone back and I've watched this again and again, and it is amazing. Like, every line of dialogue has a purpose and delivers on it. You get so much of the show. You see the doctor doing the doctor's investigation. You've got the companion kind of filling their role. They even literally have a moment where the doctor says, "Excellent question, Rose." Like, it's just like the platonic ideal of like what the companion's role in this mystery is. It's also the introduction of Captain Jack. So it is this historical story, but it is also reminding you that that Doctor Who takes place in a universe where there are human beings in the far future with spaceships of their own, and they interact with the world in various ways. And the sci-fi plot is sound. It's got a great plot resolution. It doubles as a great emotional resolution.
The supporting cast is all fantastic in that episode.
Yeah, it does.
It's a Stephen Moffat one as well, isn't it?
It is. It was his first one aside from the Curse of the Fatal Death comedy piece he did. But I just think it's a perfect episode of Doctor Who, in my opinion.
Looking through online best ranked Doctor Who episodes, because I don't remember. I'm giving you mine, but of this is listed as number 12 in the 60. But I feel like, as far as an introduction, the 11th hour that introduced Matt Smith, I think that is what I used to like introduce my daughter to. Like, we started watching with Matt Smith because I had already watched the Tennant Eccleston stuff with my son, and eventually she got back to that. But anyway, I think this is a place you could just start completely from scratch and never have seen any more, and it's a very, very strong episode if I remember correctly. And then as far as the old stuff, I think I was in the position when I was watching this of like trying to get my kids into that, and it was the Douglas Adams ones. So definitely those two I believe, what I had already identified as the thing to share.
All good selections. So, listener, if you're trying to get into this show, this is a way to get in, right? This is a way to get in. And don't forget that Rose Tyler is the best companion. Just hands down.
Do you have a favorite classic, Chris? Just a favorite, not a recommended one.
My favorite growing up was Peter Davison, but having gone back and watched later, I do see that a lot of those are, you can already see the wheels are kind of starting to come off, like a lot of the plots are pretty good, but not quite hanging together. So you go back, though, and you look at the Tom Baker ones, and they are just beautifully crafted, still perfect. And the one where they are at a lighthouse is The Horror of Fang Rock, where it is a classic horror story. The Doctor and Leela show up, and an alien massacre is about to happen for reasons that we find out as the story goes on. And it is one of those moments where Doctor Who crashes into a horror story. And what happens then?
All right. Thanks, listeners. Thanks to all of you. Maybe, depending on our stamina, maybe we'll have some after talk and continue to share a few Doctor Who things, because clearly we could keep going on this a while. But let's say goodbye to the public.
And thank you, Chris. Thanks, Chris, for joining us, man. Thanks a lot, dude.
Thank you.
This has been a real pleasure.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Get more Pretty Much Pop at prettymuchpop.com. Get bonus content for every episode at patreon.com/prettymuchpop. Pretty Much Pop is part of the Partially Examined Life podcast network, and it's also presented by openculture.com.